Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Chapter 10, Students with Special Needs or Special Populations. We know that a lot of our students who come to us have issues. Some of them are behavioral, some of them may have physical handicaps, and certainly our vocational legislation, the Carl Perkins Act, has given us opportunities to be able to meet the needs of those students that come into our classroom. And so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time going into a great deal of detail in this chapter. In fact, we have a whole course that covers special needs students. And so I'll kind of save the in-depth explanations for that course whenever, if and when you take it. But let's go ahead and see what your author has to say about this population of students. First of all, those students that are classified as special education because of the law 94-142, which basically set forth that those students with handicaps had the right to a free and appropriate education, and that our legislation would demand that we provide that to them. And for a long time, special ed students were isolated and segregated away from the regular population. We hear very, very many tales of abuse and really bad environments for these young people and adults in which to live. But 94-142 pretty well said that you're going to put them in the best, least restrictive environment, and that would be mainstreamed into the regular student population. And so that is why you and I see special needs students in our classrooms. Certainly another consideration that we have to deal with is the physical capacity of the student. Many students will have some kind of physical impairment. And so do we see that student is going to put themselves at risk, or maybe others at risk, as they participate in our labs? I know for our truck driving program, we have some individuals that certainly have some physical issues that want to take the course, but the federal regulations state that you have to be able to lift 50 pounds. And so that in and of itself weeds out a lot of students because they cannot lift that weight. And so you've got to look at and balance the physical capacity of the students versus the demands of the program. And certainly kind of leads into the third point, is that students a safety hazard? Or are they going to create some problems because of their condition? Student can't see, then certainly they don't want to be around some moving equipment like a lathe or any kind of machine that has any kind of rotational motion, because they may not be able to see that, and then get their hands cut off, or else maybe even worse. And certainly we need to have some kind of screening process available, and we'll talk more about that process in a little while. But certainly, uh, a number of people, a number of experts, both in and without the education, need to examine the student's condition and to see um, whether or not they would benefit from vocational education. And then we look at, I guess, the last 2 points, some real broad categories of special needs students. You have your handicapped students that certainly have some kind of physical issue, and there's a whole wide variety of them. And then you have on the other hand, disadvantaged. These individuals have not had the opportunities that a lot of others have had, uh, based on a lot of different factors. For example, like their socioeconomic condition. If you grew up poor, you certainly don't have the opportunities that someone had who is fairly affluent or rich. Your options are much, much limited. And so that's just one of a wide number of categories of disadvantaged. Certainly, I guess another one that's in the news here in Louisiana would be educationally disadvantaged. If, let's face it, if I grew up in a school or near a school and went to school, and my elementary school was a failing school, my chances for educational success are very, very limited. And so educationally disadvantaged is one broad category of students where they were taught could certainly make a negative impact on them. As we move on, here are a list of some special needs conditions that are covered under Public Law 94-142. First is hearing impairment. This is certainly an issue for younger learners. If they were born with some kind of hearing defect or physical issue, they could be deaf or certainly hard of hearing. On the other hand, for the adult learner, as we get older, our hearing tends to get worse and deteriorate, and so it's not uncommon for you to see an adult with a hearing aid in your classroom. So that's one classification, and certainly not being able to hear raises some major issues whenever we're in a lab, especially whenever you're trying to hear some sounds, and also some sounds of warning, or in case something is about to break. Second point is very, very near and dear to my heart, and that's visual impairment. I've worn glasses and a fairly substantial prescription since the 4th grade. And so as I get older, my eyesight is not getting any sharper, let's put it that way. And so I see that the need now for me to kind of blow print up so I can read it without having to squint or else have a magnifying glass. But certainly you can have students that may even be blind, and certainly have an opportunity to perhaps participate in some of your programs just by feel or touch. Then we have speech impairment. Something's wrong with the individual's vocal cords, or else they may stutter. or have some kind of speech impediment. And so that could certainly handicap them if they have to communicate on the job or in the classroom. The next one, orthopedic impairment. There's an issue with the arms or legs. We have a number of students that have come through my program when I taught drafting who were in wheelchairs, and they did wonderful jobs. The problem was we had to find drafting machines that could go and tables that could accommodate a wheelchair, and we first certainly found a company that had those drafting tables, and very quickly bought some, and over a number of years basically changed out all of the drafting tables in our program to these new handicapped accessible tables, and in fact we're still using them today. Then we hit one that's a little more difficult to I guess diagnose, or else certainly identify, and that's emotionally disturbed. We have students that, because of one reason or another, have psychological problems. They may be depressed. They may be drug dependent. They may have been abused. We hear in the news tragic situations where children have been bullied, either physically or online, and that they are traumatized by it to the point where they're willing to commit suicide. And so those students are in our classrooms. Some maybe on some kind of medication to maybe control some of this these mental issues that they may be having. Others, may not even know that they have a problem. But expect to see those types of students in your classroom. And the thing is, they're not that easy to pick out. They may look normal. We just have to kind of watch their actions and get to know them, and certainly communicate with other professionals. And certainly many of these students can be helped by medical professionals. And then mental impairment, either by birth or maybe some kind of medical issue. We have students that just have a very limited cognitive capacity. Their IQ, intelligence quotient, is quite low. And let's face it, they may be just perfect physically, but they just don't have the mental capacity to be able to function at a reasonable level. And so, obviously, those students we're going to have to take more and more time with them to be able to train them to perform maybe some very uncomplicated tasks. But as we've found, and research has found, that these students, once we can train them to perform, they are quite satisfied doing that, and sometimes it's not in really complicated type of work, but they're very, very happy doing that. So those are the conditions that we can see. Now, what are some special needs concerns? Well, for those of you in the secondary programs, Your individualized education plan, or IEP, is something that chances are you're going to be involved in. Public Law 94-142 states that every student will have an individualized education plan developed for them on a regular basis, which is going to kind of lay out the training and the educational goals that the parents, the students, the professionals are going to have for that student during their time in secondary education. And so be expected to be an active participant in the development of that IEP, and participate in all of the face-to-face IEP meetings. And so our input is critical to their special needs student success. And then obviously you may have to make some kind of facility or curriculum modifications to accommodate these students. And the key word, ladies and gentlemen, is a reasonable accommodation. Let's face it, if you have a very old two-story building, it's really not reasonable to spend millions of dollars to build a handicapped elevator in a building. Now, of course, you know, if a judge says that that's what we have to do, obviously that would be one thing. But let's face it, I think common sense would kind of win out, hopefully, and that kind of thing really wouldn't be reasonable just for one student. Chances are the student would just need to maybe look at something else where they wouldn't have to ride an elevator to a second floor situation. It may involve you purchasing some handicapped accessible equipment, like I just mentioned, and maybe doing some modifications to add extra shielding and guards, or maybe some I'm kind of having a senior moment here, some templates that students can use that wouldn't require a whole lot of work on their part, especially if they have any kind of issues orthopedically with their hands or with their feet, that they would need to kind of move them to manipulate things. Then we have the academically disadvantaged. Let's face it, there's some students that's the only thing they've ever made in their life is F. They've been failures from an academic point of view. And let's face it, they are, because of maybe some of their issues, going to have major issues trying to learn just some really basic stuff. And so we'll have to, certainly get back to curriculum modifications, get really back to the basics of what it is that we're trying to teach. And let's face it, that kind of curricular focus is not a bad thing for even non-special needs students. We should always take every opportunity to look at our curriculum to see how we can make it better, or certainly adapt it. Because let's face it, if one student who may be a special needs student would benefit, a chance are there would be a whole lot more quote unquote normal students who would benefit from that too. And let's face it, I guess I'll get on my soapbox for a minute here. One of the things I've always tried to do when I have to deal with special needs students is really treat them the same as every other student. Uh, I won't say that it's something that I did from the get go, but over time and through you know working with these students, you'll find that many of them are no different than all the others. They have the same kinds of issues. They'll do the same kinds of things, but yet they have some other things about them. And so uh, I think that certainly, first and foremost, most special needs students just want to be treated like anybody else. Then we've got the economically disadvantaged. And let's face it, in our economy right now, we have a whole lot of people who are just at or below the poverty level. Let's face it, times are tough right now. Hopefully, the economy will continue its upward trend, but even if things do get better economically, there's still going to be a significant portion of the population in any community, any area, who has an economic disadvantage. And let's face it, how many students do you and I know that are homeless or hungry? And so those kinds of students can benefit from our vocational training programs because their skills can help get them a job, which can kind of help to pull them out of this cycle of poverty that many of them are in right now, and also allow them to help others in their families or in their area or their group of people that are around them, to kind of lift them up out of the economic disadvantage that they're in right now. And last but certainly not least, we have a whole population of men and women who are incarcerated, and because of some crime that they've committed, are behind bars. Now, a lot of people would just say, just throw them behind the bars, lock them up, and throw away the key and let them rot. But certainly, we would want to try to turn around the lives of many of these men and women. And thus we have programs at our correctional institutions to train these individuals. And certainly Region 2 is the region that is really first and foremost in prison education here in this state. They have some programs at Angola that the inmates take, and obviously many of them, whenever they are released, will get jobs and go on and not return to a life of crime. Unfortunately, there are others that do. And so the vocational education acts, especially Carl Perkins, certainly provide quite a bit of money to correctional institutions for training programs to get inmates a trade so they can go out and become productive citizens of society. And so that wraps up this lesson. I know it's another short one, but I think the next two chapters are all going to be about the same length here. So with that, I will shut this lesson down and call it a night.